Hey people, get ready to crush everyday IELTS and CELPIP tests for all modules and make your dreams come true. I'm your motivator and I'll be guiding you through the test prep videos. So don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or you'll be missing out on some serious preparation.
Do you enjoy gardening? Why or why not?
Yes, I quite enjoy gardening. I think it's a good way to relax after a busy day. I grow some vegetables in my garden, like tomatoes and cucumbers. It feels very satisfying when you see the plants growing. I don't have much time for it during the week, but I try to do it at weekends.
Yes, I genuinely enjoy gardening, though I didn't always feel that way. I started growing herbs on my balcony a few years ago and gradually became more interested. There's something quite therapeutic about working with soil and watching plants develop. I particularly enjoy growing fresh herbs like rosemary and basil, which I then use in cooking. It gives me a real sense of achievement when something I've planted actually flourishes.
Absolutely, gardening has become one of my greatest passions over the past few years, which honestly surprised me. I grew up watching my grandmother tend her vegetable patch, but I never thought I'd take it up myself. Now I cultivate everything from heritage tomatoes to wildflowers that attract bees and other pollinators. What I find most rewarding is the mindfulness aspect. It genuinely forces you to slow down and engage with something tangible and living. In a world saturated with screens, that connection to nature feels increasingly precious and restorative.
Did you do any gardening when you were a child?
Yes, a little bit. My parents had a garden and sometimes they asked me to help with watering the plants. I remember pulling out weeds, which I didn't really like. But I also helped plant some flowers in spring. I think it was good for me, even though I didn't appreciate it much at the time.
Not very much, to be honest, but I do have some fond memories of helping my father in the garden. He was passionate about growing vegetables, and occasionally he'd let me sow seeds or water the seedlings. I remember feeling quite proud when I could spot a plant I'd helped to grow. I suppose those early experiences planted a seed of interest, even if I didn't properly take up gardening until I was an adult.
To a limited extent, yes. We lived in a flat for most of my childhood, so there was no proper garden to speak of. However, my maternal grandmother had an enormous allotment where she cultivated an astonishing variety of produce, and during school holidays I'd often accompany her there. She taught me how to thin out seedlings, recognize different soil types, and understand the importance of crop rotation. Looking back, I realize she was instilling in me a genuine respect for where food comes from, which is something I treasure deeply now.
Do you think it is important for people to have access to gardens or green spaces at home?
Yes, I think it is important. Having a garden or some plants at home is good for your health. It can help you relax and feel less stressed. Also, green spaces are good for the environment. Not everyone has space for a big garden, but even some small pots with plants can make a difference.
Yes, I genuinely believe that access to green spaces is really important for people's well-being. Research suggests that spending time around plants and nature can significantly reduce stress levels and improve mental health. Even if someone lives in a small flat, having a few pot plants or a window box can create a calming environment. I also think there's real educational value, especially for children, in understanding where food grows and how nature functions.
Unquestionably, and I think it's something that urban planners and architects don't always prioritize sufficiently. There's a considerable body of evidence linking exposure to green spaces with improved mental health outcomes, reduced anxiety, and even faster physical recovery from illness. On a wider ecological level, domestic gardens collectively provide vital habitats for insects, birds, and other wildlife that are increasingly under threat from urbanization. I'd argue that the design of residential spaces should mandate some form of green element, whether that's a communal garden, a living wall, or even a rooftop growing space.
Do you prefer living in a noisy or a quiet environment? Why?
I prefer a quiet environment, definitely. I find it very difficult to concentrate when there is a lot of noise around me. I live near a busy road and sometimes it's really hard to sleep at night because of the traffic. I think most people need some quiet time to feel relaxed and comfortable at home.
I'd say I lean strongly towards quieter environments, particularly when I'm trying to focus on something. I've noticed that background noise, even low-level chatter or music, tends to fragment my concentration and makes me feel more fatigued. That said, I don't think complete silence is always ideal. Sometimes a gentle ambient sound, like rain or birdsong, can actually be quite soothing. It really depends on what I'm doing at the time.
Overwhelmingly quiet, if I'm honest, although I appreciate that's partly a personality trait. I know plenty of people who thrive on background buzz and find silence oppressive. For me, though, sustained exposure to noise, especially unpredictable urban sounds like sirens, construction work, or neighbors' music, genuinely erodes my sense of well-being over time. I've become increasingly deliberate about seeking out quieter spaces, whether that means choosing to live further from the city center or simply switching off unnecessary background sound throughout the day. Quiet, for me, is a form of mental hygiene.
Are there any situations where you find noise particularly disturbing?
Yes, definitely. I find noise very disturbing when I'm trying to sleep or study. If my neighbors are playing loud music late at night, it makes me very angry and I can't sleep well. Also, I find it hard to concentrate in noisy places like busy cafes. I think people should be more considerate about the noise they make.
There are a couple of situations that spring to mind immediately. One is when I'm trying to read or do any deep thinking. Even fairly moderate background noise can really throw off my concentration. The other is during commutes, particularly on crowded trains where several people are having loud phone conversations simultaneously. I find that kind of noise quite grating, because it's unpredictable and I can't easily tune it out the way I can with constant sounds like traffic.
Absolutely, and I think the most acute discomfort arises from noise that is both involuntary and inescapable, meaning you haven't chosen it and cannot avoid it. The classic example for me is being on public transport while someone plays videos on their phone without headphones. It's not merely the volume that's irritating, it's the implicit social dynamic of someone prioritizing their own convenience over everyone else's. Similarly, I find sudden sharp noises, a car alarm triggered repeatedly at 3 in the morning, for instance, deeply disruptive to both sleep quality and general equilibrium.
Do you think cities are becoming too noisy? What could be done to address this?
Yes, I think cities are getting noisier every year because there are more cars, more construction, and more people. It can be very stressful to live in a noisy city. I think the government should make stricter rules about noise, for example, stopping construction work at night. Also, having more parks would help people find some quiet.
I think noise levels in most major cities have increased considerably, primarily due to population growth, heavier traffic, and non-stop construction activity. This can have a real impact on residents' quality of life and mental health. In terms of solutions, I'd suggest investing more in public transport to reduce the number of vehicles on the road, as well as creating designated quiet zones in urban areas, such as pedestrianized streets and properly maintained parks and green spaces.
Without question, though I'd argue the problem is more nuanced than simply saying cities are noisier. The real issue is less about absolute decibel levels and more about the chronic, inescapable nature of urban noise pollution, which research has linked to cardiovascular problems and cognitive impairment in children. Addressing it effectively requires a genuinely multi-pronged approach: stricter regulation of construction hours and vehicle emissions, widespread adoption of electric public transport, strategic green infrastructure to act as natural sound buffers, and, perhaps most crucially, a cultural shift in how we collectively value silence as a shared public resource.
Please begin speaking now.
I'd like to talk about a time when I was traveling in France about 2 years ago. I was visiting Paris for a holiday and I needed to find a pharmacy because I had a bad headache and had forgotten my medicine. The problem was that my French is very basic. I only know a few words from school. When I went into the pharmacy, the assistant didn't speak much English, so I had to try to explain my problem in French. I used simple gestures and pointed to my head to show where the pain was. I also tried to use some basic French words I remembered. The pharmacist was very patient and helpful. She understood what I needed and gave me some tablets. I felt quite nervous at first but also a little proud of myself afterwards. It was difficult but I managed to communicate successfully. This experience made me want to learn more French in the future.
I'd like to describe an experience I had approximately 3 years ago when I was on a business trip to Japan. I was attending a conference in Tokyo on behalf of my company, and one evening I decided to explore a local neighborhood rather than staying near the hotel. I ended up in a small, traditional restaurant where the menu was entirely in Japanese and none of the staff spoke English. Despite having no formal knowledge of Japanese, I was determined to order a proper meal rather than simply pointing randomly at the menu. I used a combination of strategies to communicate. I showed the waiter some images on my phone of dishes I recognized, attempted to pronounce a few words I'd quickly looked up, and used gestures to indicate portion sizes. To my relief, the waiter was remarkably patient and even seemed amused by my efforts. What made the experience particularly memorable was the sense of genuine connection we managed to establish despite the language barrier. By the end of the meal, the waiter had recommended a local dessert using mime, and we were both laughing. Looking back, I realize that communication is about more than language. Enthusiasm and respect for another culture can go a surprisingly long way in bridging gaps in understanding.
The experience that immediately springs to mind occurred during a solo trip to rural Portugal approximately 4 years ago. I had ventured well off the beaten track to visit a small village renowned for its traditional pottery, and I found myself in a situation where communicating in Portuguese was not merely helpful but absolutely essential. I had inadvertently taken a wrong turn whilst hiking and needed to get back to the nearest town before nightfall. I came across an elderly farmer who, despite being extraordinarily hospitable, spoke no English whatsoever. My Portuguese, which I'd hastily brushed up on using an app before the trip, was rudimentary at best, confined to pleasantries and basic vocabulary. What followed was a rather extraordinary 20-minute exchange that drew on every communicative resource available to me. I sketched a rough map in the soil, mimed the sun setting to convey my sense of urgency, and pieced together broken sentences using the handful of cognates I could recall from my secondary school Spanish. The farmer, to his immense credit, deciphered every clumsy attempt with remarkable intuition and eventually drew me a detailed map whilst explaining the route in slow, deliberate Portuguese. The encounter left a profound impression on me. I was genuinely moved by the generosity of a complete stranger who invested such patience in someone who couldn't even string a sentence together properly. It fundamentally altered my perspective on language learning, and I subsequently enrolled in a Portuguese evening class upon returning home.
How do you think translation technology, such as smartphone apps, has affected people's motivation to learn foreign languages?
I think technology has made things easier for travelers, but maybe it has also reduced motivation to learn. Many people now use apps like Google Translate instead of learning a language properly. In some ways this is convenient, but I think it is a shame because learning a language helps you understand a culture better. Personally, I still think it is valuable to learn at least some basic phrases, even if you also use apps to help you.
That's an interesting question. I believe translation technology has had a rather mixed impact overall. On one hand, apps like DeepL and Google Translate have made international communication significantly more accessible, which is undoubtedly beneficial for tourism and business. On the other hand, there is a genuine risk that people are becoming overly dependent on these tools and losing the incentive to invest time in proper language acquisition. From my own perspective, I feel that speaking even a little of someone's language demonstrates a level of respect that no app can truly replicate. It creates a human connection that technology simply cannot substitute.
It is a genuinely nuanced question. I think translation technology has simultaneously democratized communication and, somewhat paradoxically, undermined the deeper motivation to acquire a foreign language. Tools such as neural machine translation have become remarkably sophisticated, enabling people to navigate complex situations that would have been entirely inaccessible a decade ago, which is, of course, considerable social good. However, I would argue that there is something irreplaceable about learning a language from scratch. When you engage with a foreign tongue on its own terms, you do not merely acquire vocabulary, you gain insight into the cognitive and cultural frameworks through which native speakers interpret the world. This kind of empathetic understanding simply cannot be transmitted through a translation interface. My experience in Portugal illustrated this perfectly. The farmer and I connected not through technology but through shared humanity, and that distinction mattered enormously.
How important do you think it is for people to learn a foreign language in today's globalized world?
I think it is very important to learn a foreign language today because the world is more connected than before. Many people travel or work in different countries, so they need to communicate with people who speak different languages. Also, knowing a foreign language can help you find a better job. English is very useful because many international companies use it. But it can be difficult to learn a new language when you are older, so I think children should start learning early.
Learning a foreign language is undeniably important in our globalized world. With international trade, migration, and digital communication connecting people across borders, the ability to communicate in more than one language has become a significant advantage. Not only does it open up professional opportunities, but it also allows individuals to engage more meaningfully with different cultures. Studies suggest that bilingual speakers tend to develop stronger cognitive skills as well. However, I think it is worth acknowledging that the dominance of English as a global lingua franca has led some people to underestimate the value of learning other languages. That attitude, I feel, is rather short-sighted.
The importance of foreign language acquisition in an increasingly interconnected world simply cannot be overstated. Beyond the obvious professional advantages, such as accessing a wider job market or facilitating cross-border negotiations, learning another language fundamentally reshapes how one perceives the world. Linguists have long argued that language influences thought, and I believe there is considerable truth in that. When you operate in a different linguistic framework, you inevitably encounter ideas and cultural nuances that have no direct equivalent in your mother tongue, which broadens your intellectual horizons considerably. Furthermore, at a societal level, multilingualism fosters mutual respect and reduces the kind of cultural misunderstandings that can fuel conflict. That said, one must also recognize the structural inequalities in language learning. Access to quality tuition remains deeply uneven globally, meaning the benefits are not distributed fairly. Addressing that disparity ought to be a policy priority.
Do you think that misunderstandings caused by language barriers can affect international relationships? Why?
Yes, I think language barriers can cause big problems between countries. When people cannot understand each other, they sometimes make mistakes or say the wrong things. For example, in business meetings, if someone uses wrong words, the other person might feel offended. This can make it hard to build trust. Also, in politics, if a speech is translated badly, it could cause a serious problem between governments. So I believe good communication is very important for international relationships.
Absolutely, language barriers can have a significant impact on international relations. Even minor mistranslations or misunderstood cultural connotations can escalate into diplomatic tensions, particularly during sensitive negotiations. History offers numerous examples of this, statements that were perfectly reasonable in one language coming across as aggressive or dismissive once translated. Beyond formal diplomacy, everyday cross-cultural misunderstandings between ordinary citizens can reinforce stereotypes and erode goodwill between nations. I believe that investing in skilled interpreters and cross-cultural training for diplomats and business leaders is essential. Without that investment, even the best intentions can be undermined by a simple failure to communicate accurately.
Without question, language barriers pose a genuine threat to international relationships, though the nature of that threat is often more subtle than it first appears. It is rarely a matter of simple vocabulary errors. Rather, the deeper issue lies in the untranslatable cultural assumptions embedded within language itself. A phrase that carries warmth and collegiality in one cultural context may sound blunt or even contemptuous when rendered literally in another tongue. Diplomatic history is littered with incidents where poor translation, or the absence of culturally sensitive interpretation, contributed to mistrust and prolonged negotiations unnecessarily. Moreover, the problem extends beyond elite political discourse. When migrant communities struggle to communicate with host country institutions, this breeds frustration on both sides and can deepen social divisions. In my view, addressing language barriers is therefore not merely a logistical issue but a matter of fundamental social justice and geopolitical stability.
To what extent do you think advances in machine translation technology will reduce the need for people to learn foreign languages?
I think machine translation is getting better every year, so maybe in the future people will not need to learn foreign languages so much. Apps like Google Translate are already very useful when you travel. But I still think there are problems with machines because they sometimes make mistakes, especially with grammar or informal language. Also, learning a language helps you understand the culture better, which a machine cannot do. So I think people will still need to learn languages, but maybe fewer people will.
Machine translation has undoubtedly advanced at a remarkable pace, and tools like neural machine translation systems have made real-time communication across languages far more accessible. However, I would argue that technology is unlikely to eliminate the need for language learning entirely. Automated translations, while impressive, still struggle with idiomatic expressions, tone, and the subtle cultural references that native speakers naturally embed in their speech. More importantly, there is an intrinsic human value in learning another language, the empathy, patience, and cultural sensitivity it cultivates. So whilst technology may reduce the urgency for some people, I believe motivated learners will always see value in acquiring a foreign language personally.
The rapid advancement of machine translation, particularly large language model-based systems, raises genuinely fascinating questions about the future of language education. I think it is plausible that high-quality, instantaneous translation will eventually handle the majority of transactional communication needs, thereby reducing practical pressure on individuals to achieve full fluency in a second language. Yet I remain unconvinced that this will render language learning obsolete, for several reasons. Firstly, the nuance required in high-stakes contexts, legal proceedings, psychotherapy, literary interpretation, or delicate diplomatic exchanges, demands a depth of linguistic and cultural understanding that current AI consistently falls short of. Secondly, and perhaps more profoundly, language learning is transformative in ways that extend far beyond utility. It reconfigures the learner's cognitive architecture, cultivates genuine intercultural empathy, and fosters a level of human connection that a device-mediated interaction simply cannot replicate. I would therefore contend that machine translation and human language learning will continue to coexist as complementary rather than competing endeavors.
Hey people, how was your test? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or you'll be missing out on some serious fun. See you tomorrow!